Hello, everyone, and welcome to Powerhouse Working Mom Mindset Summit. I am so glad that you're here today and taking advantage of this month-long summit that is offering so many wonderful things. And I want to introduce you to today's speaker, who she rethinks everything. And this is not that she cannot make up her mind. It's that she believes that we are hungry for growth. And she has spoken in the UN as well as Brazil and Rome and London and throughout the US about how you can reclaim our health, happiness, and humanity at work. And she's helped many companies create a healthy work culture where people belong and they work better. She was born in Denmark and is now a New Yorker, and she has a diverse background in marketing, design, fashion, retail, management, and team development. In 2004, after both her parents died of cancer, she founded Path for Life to help people reclaim their personal power by taking charge of their health and well-being, and even when they're busy, because aren't we all busy and challenged these days? So she's a rethinker and a performance and culture strategist, executive coach, and C-suite advisor. She's also a certified mindfulness meditation teacher, integrative functional nutrition and medicine health coach. Wow, that is definitely hard to say. And she is a certified hypnotherapist, but don't worry, she will not try to put you in a trance today, I promise. So her book, Eat to Feel Full and Nourish Yourself for Good, has gained nationwide recognition in the news and is a new approach for getting healthy without dieting. When she's not helping people rethink their relationship with self-care at work, you can find her in the Catskills in upstate New York doing yoga or snuggling with her dog, Maya, the Rottweiler girl, who, by the way, has her own Instagram account. So helping us rethink self-care at work today, please join me in welcoming speaker and author and ex-coffee addict, Jeanette Burney. Thank you, Jeanette, for being here with us today.
Thank you, Nicole, and I'm excited that you're at the summit. I think it's such a not only a good cause, of course, but it's also an important aspect of up in a way that we can care more in our case and in the world in general. And being right is about that, isn't it?
Thank you.
So, and one of the things I want to talk about when we talk about self-care is this idea that we think a lot more about the self than we think about the care, or we think more about the care versus the self. So what is that relationship that we have with that? And the issue that we often get up against here is this idea that we think of self-care as a long list of to-dos. I hear a lot of people talking about self-care exhaustion, self-burnout. Like, that is not what should get us to burnout. Like, self-care is what sustains us. And I think the whole point, right, is rethinking self-care is more about understanding what is the relationship with self-care. So I want to ask you to put in the chat, what do you think self-care is? Self-care to you? Is it the habits that you have? Is it going to the gym, eating the? What is self-care to you? Let's put that in the chat and see here. Exercise, yeah. A lot of people think of it as the exercise that we do, as, you know, one of the practices that is important for self-care, and it is. I can see the sun just went away, so my light is changing. I'm sorry about that. But the sun is coming back out. And so other things that I often hear, making time for priorities, so our lives abundant and joyful. Yes, that's the same. I'm going to move my light, so hold on for one, because I can see I'm turning dark. Hold on 1 second. I think that should give us a little more light, right? So, so this idea that we are checking in with ourselves, yes, how I feel and what I need, that is a very, very important piece. Because when we self-care is what we have to do rather than who we are. So self-care is the relationship we have with us. If we start there, what will change? If we start by saying, well, my relationship with is the piece of self-care that allows me to do the things that help me take care of me. So let me say that again. The relationship we have with ourselves is what gives us and allows us to step into the habits that we have that take care of us. And so a lot of times what we do is we abandon ourselves when we go to work. So I'm just going to put up a little screen share here. We have 3 core relationships. We have the relationship we have with ourselves. We have the relationship we have with others, and we have the relationship that we have with work. So we have 3 core relationships, and those are always interchanging or engaging and moving through our consciousness. And so if self-care as our importance, as in the let's put it this way, not our worth, but maybe it is, but it's where we put our attention. If we put our attention on our relationship with others, if we put our relation mostly on the relationship we have with happens in this engaging, constantly moving relationship we have with ourselves. So what if the relationship we have with either others and work comes first, and we end up pushing ourselves to the last point on our list or our last attention, then we don't have time. So all of a sudden, self-care, the relationship with time, it becomes about having time to, I'm going to stop the share for now. So that relationship then all of a sudden becomes, I don't have time for self-care. But if self-care is the foundation for everything else we do, because it's about how we care for ourselves, how we matter, and the fact that if we don't take care of ourselves, we don't have the energy, the attention, and the bandwidth to be fully engaged, both with other people, but also at work. So if we can just look at that and get what is the resistance that's coming up around, what is it that we think of when I say, well, what care comes first? Is it that comes up for you? What is it? Put that in the chat for me and see, what is it about that idea that we come first that comes to you? So somebody's saying being intentional about making time for yourself, if moments to reflect and check in. So easy to put ourselves last on the, yes, it is. It's so easy to put ourselves last because a lot of times we look at self-care as habits. We look at the self-care as what we do, and that means we have to have time, right? Any more comments in the chat? And also, if you have questions, you can put it in the chat. I think it's harder for me to navigate both the Q&A and the chat over here, and it would be nicer to look at, see your questions coming in. So you got in the chat as well. So, yeah, making times and priorities, checking in with myself. And so the idea here of checking in with ourselves, again, sometimes that gets pushed last on the list, right? Because we don't for that either. What if it's just a small moment? What if that chat with us, just that small moment? What I hear a lot from people is that they feel that they have to have this routine and they have to have a ritual self-care. It feels to them that it is sort of like a perfect, it looks like it's a perfect outline of things we do. Now, of course, well, getting our sleep, drinking water, moving, taking breaks is an essential core element of self-care. It's a really big part of the foundation of care. I call that the 101 of self-care. The next level that I would like to talk about is this one here, where we look at self-care from the perspective of what is the physical need we have. And that is that relationship with self that helps us take care of those physical needs that we have. Like, oh yeah, I need my sleep. Am I making time for it? What is the priority there? But if we don't, we do need to put that into a habit. We do need to put that into a ritual. I'm not debating that we shouldn't focus on that as the basics of self-care, but we also need to outside of that and see that our relationship with self-care as it relates to how we relate with other people is about our emotional needs. It's about our need for belonging, and it's also self-awareness. And then our mental needs for growth, for developing, learning, for always engaging in that idea of growth. That is our relationship with work. That is also a relationship we have with ourselves from that, the relationship of growth, the relationship of self-realization. And you might think of this as Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and essentially a big part of that. But I'm looking at it more as those three core relationships that we have with ourselves, which is self, other, and the three core relationships that we have in our lives. Emotional connection is far more important than we realize. So the other thing I'm going to put here, let me just see what I think there was going on here. There is a chat here saying, being about making time. No, what was there? Some might feel guilty about saying no to some other things. Yes. And so I think that's a big part of this, right? We are thinking of, oh, well, self-care is about, if that's me, that sort of means that I think I'm worth more than other people. I actually think it's quite the opposite. What if not taking care of yourself? What if not taking care of yourself is actually selfish? How does that affect you if I say that? What comes to you? Yes, right? Because have you ever had a meeting with a hangry person? It's not a good meeting. Or you know when somebody in your life is grumpy or feeling off sorts, and you can't really put their attention, like you can't get them to focus. Right? It could be because they didn't have enough sleep. It could be that there's something emotionally going on, they're being distracted. But it could also just be because they're not taking care of themselves. Instead, they're exhausting them to the point of breaking. Right. And so we have all of these small bits and pieces that we don't see as our focus on why self-care is. We can easily lose track of the fact that, oh, to show up for everyone else, we shouldn't take care of us, versus to show up for everyone else, it's important that we take care of ourselves. Like, what is that change that happens there? I am going to check in for a moment because my screen has Nicole as black, and folks, when I put speaker view on, I have Nicole as the speaker. So I just want to check in with everybody how you are seeing the screen, are able to both see me and the screen share that I put up. Seeing both. Okay. I don't know if you know this, but you can change the view of the slides so that you have could double slides and looking at somebody saying that the audio is breaking up. All right, I am going to then unplug my audio and see if we can use the other audio. Here. There we go. So I am going to shift over to that and see if that helps. Does that give us better audio? Let me know if your audio sounds like it's good. Okay. So sorry for that. It's, you know, the Zoom has a tendency to work differently for different broadcasting systems, and this is not my normal broadcasting system. We're going through another funnel and stuff like that. So hopefully you're getting a proper sound and visual now. So, okay, so if we're looking at what happened, so when I had my first burnout when I was around, I think, 25 years old, and then my second burnout came right before I turned 40. And what happened was that I was working a crazy busy schedule in a fashion company, and I wasn't taking care of myself. I was surviving on coffee, hence the ex-coffee addict, and really, really having just not good health, putting all my energy into work. I was sustaining myself and pushing my energy with coffee. And if you don't know this, but coffee boosts your cortisol. So what happens when you're running on coffee is that you're essentially running on survival mode, kind of an artificial survival mode. And then on top of it, if you're feeling like you're under pressure, your cortisol goes up from that too. It's that anxiety that starts building in our lives. And I think especially right now, I want to acknowledge that there is so much going on right now that's causing us to have anxiety, to have these concerns in our lives that are very real. They're very, very real, right? We're having to navigate a lot of what's going on both in the world, but also close up, right? We're doing this today. We're doing this summit to support Project Kind, and I hope you will donate to it. Actually, Nicole, do you have the link for the donation for Project Kind? Maybe you can put that up in our chat. Because the events that are showing right now, what two bubbles just burst, right? This idea that we're healthy, we're not, and COVID just brought that to our attention. COVID brought to the attention that it's so important that we are healthy in our daily lives. And the other thing that just brought up was that we have a lot of biases and we have a lot of racism running in the veins of our society. And these are two sort of structures that hopefully can now become part of our consciousness in a whole new way. And I would like to argue that for those to become part of our consciousness in a daily way, we need self-care. Because we can't be mindful human beings, we can't be caring human beings, and we cannot show up for others if we're not even taking care of ourselves, right? So what happened with me, I see a chat here that says it can be challenging for a working mom. It very much is. And getting up really early before everyone else, having a moment for myself, even a few minutes. And I'm totally dependent on coffee. I know the coffee really, right? Before we end today, I am gonna give you some of the tools that helps you not think of self-care as having time, but having attention. Self-care is not about the time we're spending on ourselves. Of course it is as well, but it starts with the attention we bring to ourselves. And so when I was working in the fashion industry, running on coffee, all of a sudden my mother got sick with cancer, and that was right in the middle of my dad also being in cancer therapy. So what happened was that all of a sudden I had to navigate two parents being sick and in treatment with cancer while also being on my job pretty much 24/7. My dad would joke with me. He would say, oh, at least they leave you alone until 10 a.m. on a Sunday morning, because the phone was going off constantly. Text messages and things I needed to do. And if my boss, who was the CEO of the company, if he couldn't get hold of me on the phone and I didn't answer, he would just hang up, keep ringing, hang up, keep ringing, hang up, keep ringing until I would answer. You could argue that it was almost abusive, yes. But this idea that we are supposed to be constantly available. Thankfully, I think we're waking up to the fact that that is not sustainable. We can't do that. The question is, are you waking up to it? Because we need to also change our mindset about this idea that being full-time attention or paying fully attention. There's a very big difference of being fully present when we are engaged versus being constantly engaged but not actually being present. And that's where that shift is happening, I think, in our society as well, I hope, is that we're starting to see the importance not only of health, but also of the importance of where we bring our attention, where we put our attention on. And so after my mother all of a sudden also got sick, she had a short stint of treatment. And one morning I was at work. I called her to check what time my dad would be arriving later on in the evening. I was in New York. They were in Denmark. My dad was arriving, and she could barely breathe. And I said, "What's going on, Mom?" And she goes, "I can't really breathe. I'm on my way to the hospital." And a young girl had picked up the phone, and I called back and I said, "You got to get to a hospital. You got to call an ambulance." And thank God that they called an ambulance. She had called a neighbor to ask them to drive her to the hospital. My mother died in the ambulance. I did not get a chance to say goodbye to her. And it was a really strange moment in that moment to recognize that I had been so distracted from work. I had no clue, absolutely no clue, in how bad a shape she was. Granted, the doctors didn't dismiss it too, but I hadn't asked her. I hadn't asked her how she felt. And it was a real wake-up call. It was a real wake-up call for me to be like, wait a minute. I am not paying attention to the people around me because I'm so focused on my career. And I'm so focused on being there for everyone else, except the people closest to me. And so I was arguing with myself that I had taken them to New York. I had gotten hold of doctors for them. I had taken care of them in that way. But I hadn't had the conversations about how they were doing. And I think a lot of times we're so busy also taking care of kids and doing all the things we need to do, but sometimes that slowing down for just a moment and paying attention and asking questions. Where does that fit into our daily habits of care? Because remember, self-care is not just about self. It's also about caring for others. It's a very engaging, interactive, interdependent relationship that we have, right? And so coming into this right relationship with ourselves allows us to be there more for other people. Now, and I'm sorry for the sort of dropping that ball that my mother died in the ambulance, but it was a moment of recognition for me that I thought I was doing all the right things by taking care of them, but I wasn't paying attention to how they were feeling and asking them enough questions. And part of it was I wasn't doing that for me either. I was just doing, but I wasn't being. So self-care is a lot about the being piece. So let me get up another slide for us here. Let's see if I can share this screen here. Because this is a big part of what happens in our, let's see if I can move this over a little bit. Let's see if I can move this down here. There we go. So, oh, there we go. So the relationship we have with ourselves is really the key to our success and to our happiness. And so part of the, I'll move this again a little bit. There we go. Because I don't know how it shows up on your screen, but I want to make sure that it shows up so you can see the words. All right, so the self-relationship that we have is a lot based on the belief system we have. So when I start out with self-care, I have 4 components to self-care. Self-communication, self-awareness, self-respect, and self-expression. And so these are the 4 aspects that we will be going over as we go through this process of the 3 sessions that we have together. So the Becomes Today is very much about looking at the relationship we have with self. Next sessions is going to be a lot about the relationship we have with others, how self-care helps us show up for others in a different way. And then the 3rd session that we have together is going to be more about how we show up and create the kind of success we want to have in our lives because of our self-care. So those are the aspects of how we're going to do these 3 sessions. So today, really looking at what is that relationship we have with ourselves. The first C of self-care, self-communication, is about shifting from the inner critic to the inner coach. And we can't do that without compassion. So let me explain or give you a story that reflects what this is about. My mother grew up as an illegitimate child. That's what they call somebody like her who was born in the 30s out of wedlock. And basically, having been born to my grandmother, who was supposed to give her away at birth. She was supposed to adopt her away, and she was sent away in shame because she was pregnant. She had to go. You know, my great grandfather was the blacksmith of the town, and he was like, you sending her away and giving the child away, because the 13 siblings who were living in the town of my grandmother's home were all like, they were married. Like, this was a proper small community, and that was just too shameful. So my mother grew up as an illegitimate child because, as it turns out, my grandmother did ask to keep her, and she grew up in the town with my grandmother's 13 siblings. So my mother's relationship with herself was, of course, that she was not wanted, she was an accident, she was a mistake. And I've told this story to people sometimes, and because they have been adopted, there's a relationship there with self that comes up. But even just this idea that are we wanted? How do we fit into the world, right? That was what the story was in her head, that she wasn't supposed to be there. So her entire life, her relationship with others, her relationship with who she was in the world in terms of work or how she showed up, those were affected. But even more so was the relationship with herself. 99% of how we spend our attention is the mind chatter that's going on. And our self-talk is a key element to how we spend our day, how we spend our attention, how we spend our thoughts. So the first piece of self-care, the inner critic, inner coach, is really very, very integrated and in what do you call it? Interconnected with our relationship with self, or the stories we're telling ourselves about who we are. And so our self-talk affects our self-respect, and it affects our self-care. One of the things that happened when I was first changing from when I was in that executive job and my mother died, I actually got fired. I got fired because now I couldn't come to work 24/7 because I had to take care of my dad. So I really sat down and started rethinking, how do I want to live my life and what do I want to do? But then after also my dad died, I really had to do a deep dive into what matters for me. And I started working with people around how to take better care of themselves at work, because I found that that was something that already then in 2002 was missing. We were giving up our health to work. We were giving up our self-esteem to work. We're giving up our self-care to work. And so everybody was, we're burning out, we're losing our health, and we're still doing that today, right? So there's a shift that really needs to happen, and I think we're ready for that shift. And I realized that when I was talking to people about how to take better care of themselves, working around nutrition, working around habits, what I realized was that even if they were having a severe health issue, they still didn't take care of themselves because of the story they were telling themselves about who they were. Now, going back to my mother, after she died, I had a conversation with my grandmother about her pregnancy and the unwanted child and the accident that my mother believed she was. And my grandmother said, but that's not the story. She was so loved. I The reason why I got to keep her was because I begged to keep her. I didn't want to give her away. I loved that little child and I loved her for her entire life. And everybody, all my siblings loved her. They took care of her. They wanted to be in her life. And so you see how different the stories are. My mother felt that nobody loved her. My grandmother said that everybody loved her. And so I'm back again to this idea or this concept of asking more questions. Like I didn't ask the questions about how my mother was really doing. She wasn't asking her mother about what's really the relationship here. What happened to who am I to you? Like they didn't even talk about that. And I know chimes are different now. We're not in that sort of same level of, not talking to each other about love and care and things like that. We do. A lot more people are open to having those conversations. But are we paying attention and asking people, how are you today? And really listening? But how much are we doing that to ourselves? How much are we listening to ourselves? And that's where I wanted to say, Jenny was saying about having time and trying to get a little time in the morning. Those very small moments where we can just say, how am I right now? How does it feel in there? Actually, let's do that exercise together. Let's do an exercise together where I show you this idea of just pausing for a moment and checking in. It doesn't have to be a ritual. It doesn't have to be taking a lot of time. You can do it in so many small moments. And it's the beginning of that big shift of self-care being the relationship we have with ourselves. So let's just for a moment close your eyes and put your attention into the core of your belly, finding your feet on the ground. And just for a moment, feel your body. You can do this in the morning right before you get out of bed as well. You can just lay in bed and for 2 minutes, right before you get up, just put your hands on your chest or your belly, wherever it feels comfortable to you. But just that small notice into the core of your body. Taking a couple of breaths and just asking inside, how am I in there right now? This is part of the second step in self-care, which is part of the awareness. Just becoming more aware of how are we in there right now? How am I doing? And it could be that what comes to you is a word, could be that it's an image, metaphor, could be that it's something that is familiar to you. It could be that it's not familiar at all, that it doesn't make any sense at all, and that's okay. It could be that right now, if I ask, how am I in there right now? I don't know, I see some rocks laying around in grass. I don't know what it means, but there's something that it just means something to me. That might not mean something to my mind. But this idea that we might just get an image of something that addresses a felt sense in our bodies. But it could also be a lot more concrete where we just say, how am I right now? Oh, I'm tired. I'm a bit tired. And then we can ask, what do I need so that I can? And it's part of what I'm teaching throughout this whole program is coming into this relationship where we pause for a moment and ask ourselves, how am I right now? And what do I need so that I can? And that quiet moment in the morning, now we go back to the first C, which is the inner critic or the inner coach, right? So that small awareness, that small moment of saying, how am I right now? Just that moment of paying attention to ourselves can shift us forward in a whole different way because we tend to ignore how we feel. And that's where the inner critic comes in, right? The inner critic will say, well, you should just, get going and you should just. And so the change of self-care starts with that small, tiny shift that happens when we start noticing that how we feel with help us start making different choices. So I know that the quick fix to coffee, for example, is I need more energy. And essentially, once we are running on the coffee, it's a little hard to shift out of it. I know that. Partly because I was a coffee addict. I was living on coffee everywhere I went. Like all my meetings were like, where's the best coffee shop in New York? And I would schedule meetings around there because I was a coffee addict and I existed on coffee. And it takes time to come down from it, both because it's very addictive, but also because it really exhausts our adrenal system. So what happens when we're running on coffee, and for that matter too sugar, we're running on false stimulants. Our bodies actually know how to access the energy we need. And that's, I think, is this whole point of like, can we be more kind? Can we have more compassion instead of just beating ourselves to run harder, run faster, and do more and do more and do more? Can we shift that? Foundation of what actually gives us energy? Of course, it's more sleep, and sometimes we can't get the amount of sleep we want. Sometimes it's water. Sometimes we're running out of energy simply because we're dehydrated. And so it can be very small things that we need, not the big habits. And those are the foundations that we need to just get in shape. Are we drinking enough water every day? Are we getting our sleep? Are we actually getting food? You know, even just that helps us then have the energy, the attention, and the focus so that we can do the other things that we need to do. So I want to check in just in the chat here and see if there's any questions coming up so far, any comments, anything that you need in terms of your self-care that you feel that we can talk about here today as it pertains to the belief system we have around self-care. Like, what is it that stands between you and self-care? Is it the story you're telling yourself about the possibility or your worth? The belief system we have about what self-care is? That it has to be perfect or not? A lot of times I hear people say to me, well, especially when it comes to eating, and it's this idea that we say, well, if I don't eat perfect for one meal, I blew it, so I might as well not do anything the rest of the day. I might as well just take the day off and eat whatever I want. And I'm a little confused by that, sort of statement or that perspective. I'm not, intellectually, I'm not confused by that because I understand it. But if we think of it this way, resilience and motivation and attention and these things that keep moving us forward, it's a continuous cycle, right? And that's one of the reasons why I always talk about work-life quality is what's important to us, because it's not one or the other, and it's not like we have to fit them in. They both have to have a sense of quality in our lives, and that's why we need to bring self-care into the workplace or into our work day, because we can't think of self-care as something we do to recover after work, but rather what sustains us during work. And so if we have this intention that if we don't do it perfect, then we might as well drop it. And I'm thinking, well, what happens if you walk down the street and you step in dog shit? You want to take it off your shoe. You want to wash it off. You don't sort of keep stepping in it. Or, you know, like we get away from it as soon as possible and we clean it up. And so it's this idea that we need to just step back out of it. We don't keep just stepping around in it to make it worse. But for some reason we think, and it's the dieting mentality that very often comes in, and it's very much part of our culture, is this idea that it has to be perfect, and if not, not at all. And self-care has suffered underneath that for so long. Self-care has suffered from this perspective of, well, if it doesn't look a certain way, if I miss the gym one day, if I don't eat right, I think it's very, very often that we have this relationship with it that if we don't do it right, then why do it at all? Every single little bit helps. And that comes back to the relationship we have with ourselves. If our relationship with ourselves is that we matter, then what could change? So I want to see if there's any questions here that we should address. Nicole, do you have questions? Are they hammering at in the background? All right. So the inner critic and the inner coach. So I want to address that a little bit more because that is the core of the relationship we have with ourselves. That's the mind chatter. That 99% of our attention every day is just mind chatter. We have very little opening um, opening to actually create that mindfulness. Yeah, the struggle is to not feel guilty. The guilty to take care of yourself, or if you're not taking care of yourself, because there's a big shoulding going on, right? We should do all these things for ourselves. Yeah, exactly. There's actually both. So here we are, like we're saying, well, I should take care of myself, and if I don't, I'm guilty. And so what happens is that when we're feeling guilty, the inner critic is coming up. The inner critic is taking over. The inner critic is having all these stories we're telling ourselves about what we're not. We're not good enough, we're not smart enough, we're not this enough, we're all of those things. So I want you to just take a moment and write in the chat. Nobody's going to know who you are other than, well, maybe we are because there's names on it. But hey, this is a confidential space, right? We're all sharing our vulnerabilities here. So what I learned from my mother, who didn't think that she mattered, what I learned was that I was too much. I was always told that, oh, you're too much, you're too much, you're too much. So I recognized later that being told I was too much was me trying to compensate for not feeling wanted. So I had adopted her belief system of not feeling wanted. My brother was also bipolar. So when a bipolar relationship, especially when it's untreated, it wasn't at the time. I grew up in the 60s and 70s. She was not treated for her bipolar disorder. And so instead there was this constant, I love you, you're the bane of my disaster and pain. Oh, I love you. Oh no, there was this constant on and off, on and off, on and off relationship. And so my inner critic would always come up and say, well, you're not wanted. And so still to this day, I have to be very aware of that belief system when I walk into a room. If I don't feel that I can connect with people, that moment of me going, oh, maybe I'm not, included here. And this idea of being inclusive, and then I have to remind myself, there comes the inner coach. It's okay. It's just your inner critic. It's just your belief system just kicking in. Just be kind with yourself. Just engage with other people and you'll see it'll be fine, right? And so that's the inner coach. The inner coach comes in and helps us. The inner coach is kind of like, what would I like somebody to say to me when my inner critic is beating me up? So a lot of times, the I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough, especially the not good enough comes up a lot of times at work, and that's why we overexert ourselves to show up, to be so good and so perfect. So what are the things, if you don't want to do it in the chat, but what are some of the things you say to yourself? Just take a moment to work through what the inner critic is saying to you based on some of the stories and the mind chatter that's going on every day. Just write that down for yourself for a moment, just so that you have a little bit of a relationship with what that is. So you write that down on one side. And then so part of the mind chatter of feeling guilty, for example, is that it could be that, well, I'm not doing this right. Or it could be that I'm not good enough, or I'm not doing it right, or I should do more, I don't do enough. That's part of that mind chatter. Just getting familiar with that mind chatter is actually quite important to your self-care. It's a crucial part of self-care. Inner critic, you should be further ahead. Inner coach, this is as far as you've come so far and you are further ahead than ever. Yes, that's a great one, right? And so the inner coach is what we would like to hear from someone. I also often heard from people that they didn't feel that they were skinny enough, for example, right? That's been a big one in our society, and that they were not healthy enough. Or all of these things are very judgmental, and we feel guilty about them, and we're very judgmental towards ourselves about it. So one of the things that the inner coach could say is, I'm in the process of learning how to take better care of myself. I'm in the process of getting more healthy. I'm in the process. I can't please everyone, is somebody saying too? Yeah, which is probably tied to the belief that I should please everyone. Exactly. Exactly. And when we think that, so again, pleasing everyone could be part of mine as well, where I don't feel wanted. So I'm pleasing everyone to feel that I'm needed. That could be one of them, or that we're not good enough. So we're trying to make sure that everybody thinks that we are good enough by doing for other people. And it's really often what happens is that this belief system is, and I want you to be really kind and compassionate about it, because we all have it. There's nobody who doesn't have a belief system about who they are. And some might mask it with a big ego. That doesn't mean they don't have a belief system about what they're not. A lot of times when you see people showing up with this excessive confidence or big ego that almost feels like, oh my God, like it's people who are very confident are actually very grounded, and they're very present, and they're very engaged with other people. That is confidence. And that's what happens when we are in right relationship with the inner coach. That is the outcome of self-care. When you're looking at self-care, the first piece, self-communication, the outcome is self-confidence. I'll make a slide for it for next time so that we see that relationship with that. And so the inner critic, the inner coach needs compassion, and the outcome is confidence. Right? And so that's the first piece of self-care, is really just getting into right relationship with the mind chatter that continuously goes on all the time. I think I have another slide for that. Let me see. Yeah, I do. So let me go back to the screen share and show you that. Is there other comments coming up here? Yeah, this is far you got. You're further ahead than ever. Exactly. The idea of looking at the actual progress that we are making. And even if we don't feel like, listen, our lives are changing all the time. We are going from an era of where the focus has been on self-growth and very sort of, it's kind of funny actually, because self-care should be really strong because we've been so self-focused for so many years. Where now we're moving into an era of more collective thinking, more consciousness, more collective consciousness, and more care for other people. But actually, that means that we need more self-care, because it's that interconnection between other people that comes from self-care. So in a company, for example, if we don't take care of ourselves, it affects the entire culture. In a family, if we don't take care of ourselves, it affects the family. In friendships, the same thing. So interestingly enough, the shift that's happening right now is we're moving from an era of me, 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 me. We're moving into an era of we. But that actually means that we need self-care to support that. I think that's the beauty of it, is that it allows for us, because it's we. That means we're integrated, we're inclusive, we're belonging. And for us to do that, we need self-care, right? Because self-care is partly the inner critic, compassion that leads to the inner coach, which leads to confidence. And we cannot have confidence. Without confidence, we're not fully present with other people. And so does that make sense? Does that make sense to everyone? You can put a Y in the chat if you feel that this is resonating with you. Yeah. Yeah, it's this idea that we need to think of things differently. Everything in our lives here are changing, and right now, the anxiety that we have about what's happening, or the pain we have. I have personally, being a white woman from Denmark, you could argue that I have absolutely no clue what Black people are going through right now, or have gone through for 400 years, and I don't. I've worked with a lot of Black people, and Black women especially, who have taught me about their upbringing and who they are as women in the world, and what they're up against. And especially have a woman who I worked with for 10 years. I started working with her in her mid-60s. She's now in her mid-70s. And she grew up throughout, lived in a poor community. Her mother was a house help and she took herself through school. She made enough money to bring her kids through school and college and got them an education. And so this idea that, or her parents in general did, and this idea that these people or this woman has taught me so much about how she has looked at her place in the world and through what lens. And for the past 10 years, we've talked about how we can look at our place in the world through the lens of self-care, and how that can grow our confidence little by little, even if the world doesn't agree or puts more pressure on it. We can still build this strength within us. And so I really encourage you that self-care is really from the inside out. It's not something that's it's interconnected with, but don't let the outside affect how you feel about yourself. Learn what you can do for yourself. Learn how that inner communication, that self-talk really can shift that nice, beautiful relationship you have with yourself, which really we have the possibility to change so much about how we engage with other people right now, but also how we engage with ourselves. So the relationship effect that has to do with our self-worth. So what's coming up for that is that how we think of ourselves, how we feel, affects how we interact with other people, and it comes down to our self-worth. So really, really work with that inner critic, inner coach. Until we meet again next week, really, and I would like to hear from you next week, what you've experienced through that. Like, really engage with the inner critic through the perspective, through the lens of self-compassion and the inner coach. So that we are looking at the world might feel this way about us, or we believe the world feels this way about us. But if we look at ourselves from the outside in, what the world believes about us, what the world thinks about us, if that's how we think about ourselves, then we create a real imbalance in our self-care. We create a real imbalance in our self-worth. And I find it really, really important that we can shift that. Let me see if there was something else here. It can be challenging. Oh, there were some other notes here. It's important to take time to understand what our boundaries are, and that it's okay to have them. Very much so. Thank you, Julia. She says that's a wonderful presentation and so many insights. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yes, boundaries is a big part. Boundaries is going to be part of our conversation too, because that's part of the E in self-care, is the self-expression. And self-expression has a lot to do with asking for what we need and having the boundaries to say, this is where I'm comfortable and this is where I'm not. And we have to remember that boundaries is not just about pushing other people away or saying no to things. It's about what we're saying yes to from the inside out again. And this idea that when we can get into this really strong, confident, compassionate relationship with ourselves by challenging the inner critic, challenging the stories, challenging the belief system, challenging our self-worth, and say, well, if I don't feel worthy of this right now, what do I need so that I can feel more worthy? Instead of just getting stuck in that conversation about not being worthy. Right? So that's the mind chatter that gets stuck in this constant self-talk. If you remember that slide of just going around and round and round, digging a deeper hole of unconscious behavior. So for us to be more conscious in our self-care, it starts with that relationship. It starts with that inner critic. It starts with that compassion. I'm going to pause here. We only have 5 minutes left, and I want to make sure that if there are any questions about this, if you can, you feel free to throw it in the chat. But I'd like to invite you to really engage with the inner critic from the perspective of kindness, like you would a friend. If a friend came to you and say, I am just not good enough, I am I am guilty for not doing enough for myself, and I feel guilty for all this, you would immediately say to your friend, don't feel guilty for that. Well, we can't tell other people how to feel, but we can argue with them and says, it's okay that you feel guilty about it. However, is that really true? That you need to feel guilty about that? Why don't you matter so much that you can take care of yourself too? Or why does it have to be perfect? If we can start asking more of those questions of ourselves, why do I have to be perfect? Why does my self-care have to be perfect? Why does it either or? Again, it's the society has brought us up to believe that it's either perfect or not working. There's so much in between of perfect and not working. And yes, just a reminder again here that you can donate to Project Kind. I would say that one of the things that when we're under stress and anxiety and pressure from everything that's going on, as I mentioned before, I being Danish and white, there's not growing up in a world of racism, growing up in a culture that was a lot more focused on social care. You could argue that I have no clue what happens, but what also, and I don't know how it feels to someone else, but I can only have so much empathy because I can see how this is a system that's not working. Our healthcare system is not working, and our culture of bias and racism is not working. And that's because we don't care. It's because we don't have enough care and respect for ourselves and each other. At least, I'm not saying that's the only reason why, but I'm saying that's a beginning that we can start changing how we take care of ourselves, how we engage with other people. And self-care is the foundation for that. So, I hope that you can see self-care through another lens, that you can see self-care from the inside out, which is the way it should be. Or again, now I'm shoulding, right? But the way we can see self-care from the inside out is really a deep, deep relationship we have with ourselves, which I believe that we have been missing for far too long. If we start there, then it's not about time, it's not about the habits. They will adjust. Just like a meeting with your boss or a friend, you would not miss that. Essentially, eventually, you won't miss the meeting you have with yourself either. So, until next week, thank you so much. Get familiar with your inner critic. Use kindness and compassion to access your inner coach and see how your compassion might change. It's a small start with a huge impact. So thank you very much, and I hope to see you next week. I don't know if you're coming back on the screen, Nicole, to say goodbye, or... Oh, do I have to unmute you? There we go. You have to unmute. There we go.
Yes, thank you, Jeanette, so much. That was really, really wonderful. And like somebody mentioned in the chat, a really great way to get into the weekend, to start the weekend, just with this new kind of thought about how can we really get greater connected to ourselves, which in essence will help us be more connected to the world. So thank you so much for that. And thank you everybody for joining. Don't forget, if you haven't already and you can donate to Project Kind, you can just see in the chat the text with the code Project Kind. What's the number here? It's one more time. I'll tell you. It is 44321. You can text that, and just so you know, if you go to Project Kind website, you can actually see the journey and the story of the women that we're helping. There's 3 women specifically that all the funds that we've raised through this summit will go directly to them to help put a roof over their head, food on their tables, and to really keep them in their house. So we appreciate anything that you can do. Jeanette, thank you again. We'll see you next week. I'm looking forward to the next session. Spread the word. This is a summit designed for all women. So if there's women that you know that would enjoy this topic, this will be on replay. And so they can always watch Jeanette on replay and then join us next week for session 2. So thanks, ladies, and everybody have a wonderful weekend. Thanks, Jeanette.
Thank you so much.
Right,
bye, everyone.
I think you close out of it. Yeah, there we go.